videotape has surfaced of Joe Biden. Now, we've showed you time and time again, every expert on the Ukraine situation has predicted for not only a few years, but for decades, that what is happening right now would happen if the United States and NATO kept doing what they're doing, which is expanding and overthrowing Ukraine's government. Here's Joe Biden. Now he's going to tell you. So everybody's, again, this is the part that no one's reporting in the news, even on YouTube. So it's the how we got here. No one ever talks about how we got here. So here we go.
I think the one place where the greatest consternation would be caused in the short term for admission, having nothing to do with...
He's talking about admitting states in Eastern Europe into NATO. What we promised to Russia when Germany reunified, the United States and NATO promised to Russia that we would not expand NATO 1 inch, and then we went and expanded it everywhere, Poland, everywhere, and then now we're trying to get, and he's going to bring up Ukraine, and so what's it? I think we added we add 11 countries? We added a shit ton of countries, and we said we weren't going to do it. Do you know how many we added, Aaron?
Not at the top of my head.
Not at the top of your head. Okay, so that's what he's talking about, adding Ukraine to NATO. Here we go.
I think the one place where the greatest consternation would be caused in the short term for admission, having nothing to do with the merit and preparedness of the country to come in, would be to admit the Baltic States now in terms of NATO-Russian, US-Russian relations. And if there was ever anything that was going to tip the balance, were it to be tipped in terms of a vigorous and hostile reaction, I don't mean military, in Russia, it would be that. So the way I look at the calculus here...
What? So let me bring in Aaron Mate from mate.substack.com. Could you please react to that? Because my jaw was on the floor when I watched that.
So he's speaking in 1997, and he says that if the U.S. admits the NATO, the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, that Russia would have a harsh reaction, and that would be the tipping point. And he's saying that in 1997, and that's exactly what the U.S. went and had and supported under George W. Bush in 2004 when they admitted those 3 Baltic states. And that did indeed really anger Russia and make it start being very, very clear that this has to stop. You cannot keep expanding your hostile military alliance to our borders, because that's what the move with the Baltic states did. And what did the U.S. do in response? 4 years later, it promised NATO membership to Georgia and Ukraine. Ukraine especially being the biggest sore spot because it's right there on Russia's border, and it shares a huge history and cultural and family ties. Millions of people in both countries have family across the border. Millions of Ukrainians speak Russian, identify as ethnic Russian. So, and even George W. Bush's own aides, including Fiona Hill, who's now a regular on cable news, she was warning him against it. But the Bush administration overruled that, and successive administrations have, instead of backing off of that, have essentially continued the policy to the point where Joe Biden comes now into power. And instead of agreeing to Russia's demand to agree to Ukrainian neutrality, Joe Biden said, let's have a war. That essentially was Joe Biden's decision when he was the president. Back when he was a senator, he was warning exactly of the outcome that he's now confronting.
And so, again, it drives me crazy to no end that I know this. That I found this out. I found this out. I'm not supposed to know this stuff. I'm supposed to disbelieve this stuff. I'm not even supposed to hear about it. But somehow, if I know it, that tells me that all the smarty pants people know this too. And they're just ignoring it. And they're going along. Why? Because it's easier to go along. I got rent. I got kids in college. It's hard to go tell you the truth. And here's
it's crazy.
Go ahead.
The people who are saying this now are people like us who are, leftist media personalities, people on YouTube. I'm at the gray zone, relatively on the margins. that shows how right-wing this country has become when it comes to militarism. Because back when Joe Biden was talking about this in 1997, he was joined by people like George Kennan, one of the most eminent U.S. diplomats, Robert McNamara, the former defense secretary, many prominent people warning of exactly the same outcome, that if the U.S. kept expanding NATO to Russia's borders, it would be catastrophe. But the problem was, at that time, the same time as Joe Biden was speaking here, there was an intense lobbying operation, one of the most expensive lobbying operations in U.S. history, from the arms industry, who stood to make billions of dollars if the U.S. would expand NATO, because it would open up all these new weapons markets. And that's who won out. And even though William Burns, who's the current director of the CIA, back when he was the ambassador to Russia under Bush, he wrote a cable put up by WikiLeaks saying that he had spoken to Russian elites across the spectrum, from whether it was Putin or people on the opposite side of Putin. And all of them said that for them, Ukrainian membership in NATO was a red line, that Russia would be forced to intervene. It was such a paramount issue to Russia's security. And Bush, Obama, Trump basically, and Biden now too, all chose to ignore that and chose to expand NATO and bring us to this conflict that we're in now. Doesn't excuse what Putin is doing, which I think is criminal and illegal.
Right.
But the fact is, this has been warned about, including by Joe Biden himself, basically, for more than 20 years. It shows how reckless U.S. policy has been and how much policy has shifted to the right, where what was once a mainstream position is now left to us to have to remind people of.
You know, when you back a bear into a corner and poke it with a stick, he's going to bite you. And I can warn you that that's going to happen. And if you do that, it's kind of, you're partly responsible for the bear biting you.
Absolutely.
That doesn't mean I condone bears biting people.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what some people will try to do, because that's called a straw man argument. And then that's how they kind of discredit you, because they can't actually argue your actual point. So they have to try to somehow smear you as being some kind of traitor to your country. So here he said also this. Watch what he says about China and Russia in this clip.
Our conversation was gone off, was repeated with Lebed.
So he's talking about, he had these, this is all about NATO expansion. He had these conversations with Russian diplomats, and this is what he said to them about NATO expansion.
Talked about they don't want this NATO expansion. They know it's not in their security interests, and on, and said, well, and if you do that, we may have to look to China. And I couldn't help using the colloquial.
Now, when he says, if you do that, we may have to look to China, does that mean, I don't know what this, I'm guessing he means by that the Russians will say, if you do that, we're not going to be in economic partnership with you like we are right now. We're going to be in economic partnership with China. Right? Is that what that is, Aaron?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so let's listen to that. Okay, here we go.
Our conversation was gone off, was repeated with Lebed. They talked about they don't want this NATO expansion. They know it's not in their security interests, and on, and said, well, and if you do that, we may have to look to China. And I couldn't help using the colloquial expression from my state by saying to Zganov, lots of luck in your senior year. Good luck. And if that doesn't work, try Iran. I'm serious. I said that to them, and these were, and they know, I knew, they knew, everybody knows that is not an option. And everybody knows, every one of those leaders acknowledges and needs, and they resent it, but they need to look west.
So what he's saying there is, we have all the leverage, so we can do whatever the F we want to Russia. Because at the time in '97, Russia was very weak. They were a mess as a country. And so he was threatening them, like, go ahead, go to China. Go, really? Well, now look, now China's overtaking us on the world stage. He was talking like quite a moron. But go ahead, Aaron, if you want. What would you like?
Jimmy,
to say?
Look, now there's no way Russia would have done this in Ukraine if they did not have China's blessing. There's no way.
That's right.
No way, because they knew, because Russia doing this knew it would lead to severe repercussions, being cut off from the Western-led economy, all that stuff. The only state that could help them out would be China. So basically, what Joe Biden said would never happen is exactly what happened. China gave its blessing essentially to this, because they saw that Russia was being put into a corner, and now China is coming in to help out Russia. And if the U.S. is successful in cutting off Russian energy imports, then all those exports will just go toward China. and the rest of Asia. So that's what's happening. And the irony, Jimmy, too, by the way, is that the U.S. has put itself in such a bad position in trying to cut Russia off from the world that now the Biden administration has to go, hat in hand to Venezuela and ask them basically for forgiveness and say, okay, that whole coup thing, that whole trying to install Juan Guaido thing, we didn't mean that. Our bad. And can you give us your oil again? We know we cut off your oil because we're trying to destroy your economy because we wanted to overthrow you. But now that we're cutting off Russian energy, we need your oil. And that's why Biden sent some top officials to Venezuela this weekend. And all of a sudden, they went from refusing to recognize Nicolas Maduro as the president of Venezuela to now calling him president again.
So they didn't go down there and meet with Juan Guaido. They actually went.
Honestly, I don't even think Juan Guaido was told they were coming.
Jesus, that's great. So I didn't know that. I didn't know things got so bad we actually had to go to Venezuela for oil.
That's Biden sent a delegation of top officials to Venezuela this weekend. And also that's why they're also trying now to really rush to save the Iran nuclear deal, because they also need that Iranian oil too. But I'm not sure. I don't know if they're going to be, even though Iran and Venezuela are really suffering under U.S. sanctions, I don't know if that will be enough, because Venezuela and Iran know who tried to destroy them, who tried to overthrow their governments. And so are they going to help the U.S. out right now? I wouldn't be so sure of that.
If I was them, if I was Venezuela, and I would try to make an alliance with Russia and China.
Well, that's what Venezuela's done. But the problem, U.S. power makes it very difficult to survive, even with Russia and China's help. But the point is, this situation has given leverage to both Venezuela and Iran, and we'll see how it plays out. But it's just funny that back then Biden was bragging about how the U.S. holds all the cards. Well, they clearly don't now.
And it's just crazy. I have video, and I can show people like a video after video after video of people like Joe Biden saying this exact thing. Hey, if we keep doing this, we're going to force Putin or Russia into a corner. We're gonna back a wounded animal into a corner. And that's when they're the most dangerous, and you shouldn't do that. And right now, so let me just, so there it is. That's an amazing piece of video. I just want to leave that there. Hey, we got more dates for our 2022 stand-up tour. We're going everywhere. We're going to Dallas, Houston, Florida. We're going to Omaha, Des Moines, Pittsburgh, Columbus, Ohio, and Los Angeles. Go to jimmydorecomedy.com for a link for all the tickets for all our shows.